Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy. This is day after election. We just did our live episode. For anyone who just listened to the last episode, if you're watching this later or listening to it later, which you will be, that's what just happened. So we're real raw.
Very raw.
But we did the live episode about the election. We didn't want to just talk about it again because I don't know. You feel the same way, but I'm also just like, I'm in pain. Like I'm just hurting.
I'm done talking about it.
Yeah.
You know?
So we're going to talk about something else. You'll be listening to this on like the Monday after the election. I am sure, pretty reasonably confident that still probably the only thing on most of our brains will be this catastrophic election.
Yeah.
But here we are. Let's distract ourselves with something else. And we're going to talk about AI today.
Yep.
And so I think we'll do, if this sounds good, Taina, is we have an episode that we use Notebook LM, which is Google's new tool that you can create an audio discussion using any information you feed it. It will take that information and create like an audio discussion about it. So I fed it a few episodes of our show and said, like, create a discussion about Messy Liberation podcast. And so the episode it created is 6 minutes and 45 seconds. If you only want to listen to part of it, or if you want to skip the whole thing and just hear our discussion about it, skip ahead.
Skip ahead about 6 minutes.
6-7 minutes, and you'll come back to us talking about it. But we wanted to give you an example of what this new technology sounds like and how it could be used and how scary it can be.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm going to splice this in now, magic of technology, and you can listen, and then we'll come back and talk.
All right, so we're diving into Messy Liberation today.
Yes.
And I'm really interested in their take on the election coming up. They've been making waves with their own way of looking at politics.
Right.
And I think what's so interesting is that they see it all through this lens of intersectional feminism.
And that's what makes them so interesting. You know,
So-
they're not afraid to go there.
Yeah.
And they get really real about how all the different parts of our identities, you know, race, gender, like all of it,
Right.
how that actually plays into politics.
Exactly. And I think that's so refreshing,
Mm-hmm.
especially now. You know, things are heating up with the election.
Yeah.
So for those of us who maybe haven't tuned into Messy Liberation yet, who are these people?
Okay, so the voices you're going to be hearing are Becky Mollenkamp and Taina Brown. That's Tainu.
Got it.
And they are all about, you know, really looking at social justice, politics, even pop culture sometimes,
Wow.
through this really sharp intersectional feminist lens.
And I'm curious, you know, because that term gets thrown around a lot, intersectional feminism. What does it actually mean to them?
Yeah, it's kind of like their foundation.
Right.
It's the idea that, like, the personal is political,
Yeah.
you know, like our everyday experiences, all those different parts of who we are really shape how we see the world.
Totally.
And how we deal with all these, you know, power structures and systems.
Yeah. And they don't just talk about it, they like embody it
Yes.
in how they have these conversations.
Yeah,
It's like they're not afraid to use humor or personal stories.
Right.
Even get a little passionate sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So really dig into these complex topics.
Yeah, it's like you're sitting down with your friends having this really interesting but sometimes heated conversation.
Totally.
And, you know, it's not just like how the media covers these women. It's also about like who even gets to be seen as a serious candidate
Oh, totally.
and like whose ambitions are okay and whose aren't.
Right. Like who gets to be ambitious? And, you know, that actually reminds me of another episode.
Okay.
They were talking about J.D. Vance,
Oh, yeah.
you know, running for Senate in Ohio.
Right.
And that whole conversation got me thinking.
In what way?
Well, they talk about his wife, Usha,
Yeah.
and like how she supports him.
Yeah, they were really interested in that.
Right. Because she's Indian American,
Mhm.
and they kind of get the sense that she's coming from a more progressive place.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a contradiction.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so they even say, like, does being that close to power, does it just like change you?
It's like that saying power corrupts.
Right.
And they go deeper into it, like talking about white supremacy and capitalism and the patriarchy.
Oh, wow.
And how those systems kind of like reward certain behaviors, even if those behaviors go against your own values.
That's so interesting.
It's like, are you really able to be in those spaces, those really powerful, wealthy spaces without being affected by them?
Right. Is it even possible?
And I appreciate that they don't try to give you a simple answer, but they do want us to like think about those same things in our own lives.
Totally.
Like, how are those systems maybe messing with us without us even realizing it?
Right. And that leads to like a whole other conversation they have about how we deal with those conflicts in our own relationships.
Especially with people who are really close to us.
Exactly. Like, how do we navigate that?
And they brought on this expert, Defrain.
Right.
She has this really interesting perspective, like all about empathy and understanding.
Okay.
Even when it's hard.
Even with people you disagree with.
Yeah. And she talks about how we're all kind of conditioned to see the world a certain way.
Oh, wow.
Like, we don't even realize it half the time.
Right. Just like ingrained.
Exactly. And she tells the story about her old neighbor.
Okay.
And this neighbor was really stuck on this idea that women should just like have babies and that's it.
Oh, wow.
And, it's just these little interactions that can sometimes make you think differently.
Make you question things.
Exactly.
So that's Dee's take.
But Taina's not afraid to push back.
Oh, she's going to say what she thinks.
Oh, yeah. She's like, do these people even deserve your attention?
Right.
It's like,
right.
especially when you think about all the harm that's been caused.
And that's what I love about them.
Yeah.
Not afraid to disagree.
Right.
They're going to challenge each other.
And I think that's important.
It is.
Because it's messy.
It is.
Like, life is messy.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to pretend it's not. It makes it real.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, it's messy.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes you think, like, is it even worth it? You
Yeah.
know?
I mean.
Like, having these conversations, even if someone has these beliefs that are harmful.
Oh, you mean like, is it actually going to do anything?
Yeah. Is it better to focus on, like, changing the system itself?
Right. Because Taina seemed to think that was more important.
Yeah. Like, maybe we shouldn't waste our energy trying to change individual minds.
And just focus on, like, dismantling the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's where they bring up this idea of divestment.
Okay. I've heard that word, but I'm not totally sure I get it.
So it's like making a choice to stop supporting something.
Okay.
And that could be with your money, your time, even just your attention.
So, like, if you don't agree with a company's practices.
Exactly. You stop buying their stuff.
Interesting.
They talk about McDonald's and Starbucks, even PayPal.
Wow. So, like, everyday companies.
Yeah. And they specifically called out Starbucks for how they were fighting against the union.
Oh, wow. Didn't know that.
It's like those little things, those everyday choices, they actually matter.
Yeah. But it feels like a lot,
It should be overwhelming.
Like, how do you even keep track of it all?
And they get that.
Yeah.
Like, they're not trying to make you feel bad.
Right.
It's more about just being aware
Okay.
and trying to make choices that, you can feel good about.
Yeah, like aligning with your values, even if it's not perfect.
Exactly.
I like that. No shame, no judgment.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Totally. And that's what's so great about this podcast.
What do you mean?
It's just real.
Yeah.
They're not pretending to have all the answers.
Which is refreshing.
It is. It's like they're figuring it out along with us.
And reminding us that it's okay to be messy.
Exactly. It's messy liberation after all.
So what's the takeaway here?
Well, they leave us with this idea that real change, the kind that really matters,
Yeah.
it means changing the system itself, not just like rearranging the deck chairs.
I love that analogy.
Right. Like, we can't just swap out one politician for another.
You need to rethink the whole game.
Exactly. And that's what messy liberation is all about.
It's about getting uncomfortable,
Yeah.
asking the tough questions, and actually doing the work.
And having these conversations, even when they're hard.
Because that's how we make a difference.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So find your lane, figure out what matters to you, and get messy.
That's messy liberation.
Messy liberation.
Okay, we're back.
We're
that
back.
Was the messy liberation conversation. And just so everyone knows, those two voices you heard are not people.
They're AI generated.
Correct. So it's the same two voices that are used for everything that tool right now does. I am certain that eventually there will be a range of voices you can choose from. But right now it's just what sounds like probably a generic white guy and a generic white lady.
Yeah. Siri and what's the one that was it? IBM came out with.
Oh, do they have a man?
I forgot what they called
Probably
it.
didn't last because, we like to have women be subservient and telling us and helping us. So of course it's women's voices that are spinning your wheel.
So what before generating this discussion, because I'm assuming you're calling it that because you don't want to call it a podcast episode, and I'm on board with that. What, or I guess just in general, like, what are your thoughts and what do you know about AI, Becky?
What do I know about AI? I know that it makes my brain hurt because I don't really, I understand. So why it's called LM is language model, right? So I understand that AI is a language modeling system.
Yeah.
Right? So it uses available data and it feeds all of that data into these computers that then are able to take that data at a rapid, scary clip and turn it into something, to create something new out of that.
Yeah.
But it can't create whole cloth because it's not human.
Yeah.
So it has to have information to create something. I am sure that anyone listening to this is going to be like, who knows about AI? Who actually understands AI is rolling their eyes hard. Oh my God, she doesn't understand it. But I don't really understand it. I just know that it scares the crap out of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's here to stay.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. I don't know much about AI either, other than the fact that what it gives us is what we first give it. And then it takes, like you said, it takes that and it generates something quote unquote new for us. But it's really not new. It's just the same thing repackaged in a different way and maybe an evolution of an idea or of a thought. I have read a little bit of Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, that came out some years ago. She's spoken and researhed and, writes about the intersection of technology and, systemic oppression. She's out of UCLA, I believe. And she actually used to work in technology before she went back to get her PhD. So she's kind of an outlier in terms of researchers who are talking about AI in that way. And honestly, the first time I listened to that discussion that you sent me on Slack, I was kind of freaked out.
Right?
First of all, it feels really surreal to hear these fake voices that are probably a conglomeration of a bunch of different voices that have been recorded, right?
Yes, because we know Scarlett Johansson sued about AI using her voice. A voice that sounded eerily similar
to hers. Yeah.
Right.
So it felt really surreal, but then it was also interesting because the discussion, the way it's paced feels very much like a computer giving me information. It feels like every part of the conversation, the back and forth, is in response to a question. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel like a natural progression of a conversation. And I could definitely tell how it was quite literally regurgitating information from the episodes. It was saying things verbatim from the episodes. It was just a different intonation, or if you fed it a question, it said it as an answer, you know what I mean? And so it felt like a clone of an episode. It didn't feel original, if that makes sense.
It does. And to be fair, I don't know that I challenged it to do something very original or creative, which it'd be interesting to try that and see what happens if you do say, create something new using this as a guide. But let me be clear, what Google right now anyway says Notebook LM is not to create podcast episodes and to create original thoughts. The idea behind it is more of a study guide. And I could see the benefit of it. Basically, it's you could say, take this document or this study guide from my teacher, or if you have, I suppose, a PDF maybe of a book. There's only certain types of documents it can upload and read. But if you give it enough information, you could say, take all of the stuff from my class that we're learning and create a 10-minute conversation that talks me through all of the salient points. In the same way that there are podcasts out there that do a similar thing for books, right? They read the book and they give you basically the Cliff's Notes, and I can't remember what they're called in Canada, but the Canadian version of Cliff's Notes. I only recently learned that they don't have Cliff's Notes. They have something that's similar. But anyway, it gives you that version of something. And I think to talk about accessibility for a second, I do think that there's something really beautiful about that the potential of it for that. For people who do learn differently, for auditory processors, for people who can get overwhelmed by all of the different sorts of information and do really well when it's presented in a certain way. Because I could see if you listen to the episode, can't you hear how it would be really good at talking to you about a bunch of different articles that it read or something, right? So I think for what its intention is, it's great. And of course, this also, though, gives us, and I think what we're thinking about is the glimpse of what is next. Right? So that it's not intended for podcasts, but if this technology begins to exist where we can create entire conversations, whole cloth, from just these AI generated voices, that feels scary. And I just saw a statistic that there's already 800 or 1,800, and this was last week, so I'm sure it's doubled in size by now, 1,800 AI generated podcast episodes out there. So it is being used for that. It is coming. And I guess the ethics of it are a little scary because, right now, anyone who uses this tool is going to hear those same two voices. You might get real familiar with them soon, right? But what happens when that begins to shift and there's endless voices and you don't what are the ethics around that of are the platforms going to enforce, and how do they know? How can they enforce some sort of warning? This episode's created by AI. It's a little scary about what it could do.
I didn't know that there was already AI generated podcast episodes out there. I think the ethics of it is really, that's where a lot of the tension is, obviously. I know with if you use, there's kind of an honor system right now. If you use AI to generate images, right? The expectation is that you will let people know that it's an AI generated image and not an original work or something that, someone came up with on their own.
Right. YouTube, I think I say the platform for YouTube is the place I've noticed it where they actually have, you're supposed to select and say no or yes.
But not everybody does that.
Exactly. It's the honor
not everybody
system.
does that. So I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you do, but I'm wondering if the people who are working on AI are also working on an algorithm that can detect if something is AI generated or not. Right. And
I think there's people trying to figure that out, but they're coming. I feel like this is what always happens with technology is the people who are trying to figure out how to fight the nefarious uses of technology are always a step behind.
Because it's not, I think sometimes that the work to create checks and balances is seen as a hindrance, right? It's seen as an obstacle. So it might not get as much funding. It might not get as much attention. It might not get as much visibility, etc. I think the other concern with AI also is that obviously there's a concern of it's only as good as the information we give it. So we live in a fucking hellscape. So the information we're giving it is not the best, but also and this is something that I've seen people try to shout out from the rooftops, and it usually gets silenced for the sake of progression and innovation. But the effect of AI technology on climate change. And I don't think that we as a human species are at a point to really build momentum on AI technology without addressing some of these climate change issues, because apparently, I don't even know what the number is, but it's a ridiculous amount of water that it takes just to generate just a small amount of AI technology. And I see you're looking it up, so thank you for doing that. But and so I think it's harmful not just in the ways that we immediately think of it, but it's also harmful in so many other ways.
So it's AI's projected water usage could hit 6.6 billion meter. I don't know what M3 is by 2027, but basically it's Google's data centers in 2023 consumed 5.56 billion gallons of water. And that is like, we're barely scratching the surface.
Wait, and where is Google's data center? Don't tell me it's in fucking California. That's been in a drought forever.
I don't know if they are actually pulling it from there. I don't know. I don't know if the data center is located where they are. My guess is it's not. It's probably located in a foreign country with far less resources that Americans are consuming, because we love to do that. I mean, in the same way that, you know, the more you learn about how lithium batteries are mined and the disgusting human mistreatments involved in that, like, it's tough. And I hear you on that. And I feel scared because, much like lithium batteries, there's only so much you can do as an individual when everything moves towards that, right?
Yeah.
So all of the technology that we need to sort of function in this society, if you're going to have a business, you're going to be an employee, you're going to, you know, be able to get a hold of your kids, whatever, like, require lithium batteries. It's hard to opt out. And AI is, right now, you can opt out. But it seems pretty clear the way tech is moving, it will soon become the similar thing where it's not easy to opt out. It is not as simple as, I just don't use AI. Because it's getting integrated into everything.
Yeah. It's like smartphones. Like you cannot, and Wi-Fi, like you really can't exist without a smartphone or Wi-Fi. So I looked up Google data centers and they're all over the world, right? There's like this long list. Most of them are in the US. I'm not seeing anything in California, but there's definitely some in Nevada.
Which
but
is
I'm
also
also
drought.
yeah. But I'm also wondering, is that statistic that you found per data center, or is that total? Because if that's
I don't
per
know if
data
it's
center,
I mean, it sounds like it's total. It said Google's data centers consumed. Every time an AI tool is prompted, it uses 16 ounces of water. So asking 20 to 50 questions on ChatGPT is the equivalent of using half a liter of water.
right?
And
I know I've used ChatGPT in my business. I don't use it often, but I have used it for like brainstorming and ideation.
I use it for writing the show notes for this show. Because if I don't, the manpower that takes makes this become
impossible,
untenable.
Yeah.
And these are the challenges that I think we continue to face. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we get into a place where this, I think, just the same way where you could say, I don't use a cell phone, I don't have a computer. Cool. Good luck making a living. And I'm afraid AI is going to get to the same place because we have such expectations around productivity that you won't be able to compete and stay employable, or in the case of running a business, you know, profitable. And that is scary. It is really scary. And I also I think the climate change piece is huge. So I'm glad you're shining a light on that. Also, just to some of the other reasons about ethics, forget about just the clarity on who's creating it and what, you know, is this AI? Is this not? Is it pulling information from Russia or what? But also it's been found, and I think the book that you mentioned is one that talks about this, if I'm not mistaken, that it's just inherently racist, inherently sexist, because it's created using information inside of our systems that are inherently sexist and racist. And that's also really problematic as it gets more traction and more use.
So I mean, I think, you know, the question obviously is how do we move the needle forward in technology and AI innovation without, that's not to our detriment. That isn't gonna speed up the clock on a climate catastrophe that isn't going to continue to harm, you know, folks from the global majority who are continuously living in marginalized systems that marginalize them. And I don't know that I have an answer for that. I don't know enough about technology to really know how to deal with the technical side of it. I know enough about people. Like, I think when it comes to creating AI solutions, like, I feel like there's this thing that happens in the workplace and in life in general where it's like, sure, he's an asshole, but he's really good at his job. So, we just like let him get away with stuff, or we just look the other way. And it's like, we can't afford to do that as we're building structures and technologies that are going to have such a heavy impact in our day to day. Like, we can't afford to look the other way when people are not at a place where they can value like human life and human dignity, and are not at a place where they can do as much as they should be doing to be unbiased, right? Because no one's ever going to get it 100% perfect. I'm not going to get it 100% perfect. I do messy shit all the time. I do a lot of messy shit on this podcast. And I say a lot of messy shit on this podcast. So like, no one's ever going to be like 100% perfect, but I think we haven't figured out how to be human yet. So how the fuck are we moving towards figuring out technology that has human capabilities? Like, we don't even know how to be human to each other.
It's scary. It's scary. Well, and speaking of messy, like, I love using ChatGPT. Like, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's helpful. It's interesting. It can give you a lot of like new perspectives.
Yeah.
It makes things easier, but sometimes it's actually just kind of fun. And it's like, and it's a novel. Like, oh my God, I'm doing this. And it's immediately giving me this answer. And it's like, taking information I gave it and giving it to me in a new way. And like there's a lot about it that's super freaking cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I'm not going to lie. And that scares me even more because it feels like social media.
It feels like a game.
Yeah. Like, I am worried about the attention economy piece of that and the possibilities for that and the ways that it's going to be like when you think about how technology or social media and all that's gone there and what that's done to our attention span, to how our attention is being, monetized. ChatGPT feels like it's going to take that and amp it up by 1 million.
Yeah.
Because now it's like your friend.
Like,
like now it's made this on this weird parasocial, like I'm scared. Like the movie Her, which I never actually saw, but I know the premise of, right? This guy who falls in love with his like Siri. That shit scares me. We already have enough white men who are young white men who are lonely, who are angry because they're lonely, who are seeking comfort and solace and solidarity online with other young white men who feel the same way. And this election showed some of what that means, right? And who those people are, those Joe Rogan listeners. And now you give them AI that can function as a girlfriend, right? That will tell them what they want to hear, that will be that perfect woman, quote unquote, for them. Like, I'm terrified of what that could start to look like and do to some of these young men's minds.
Yeah.
And then how they show up and interact with the world outside of this world that gets created for them. That is perfect, because what AI can do for you is create a world for you of friendships.
Yeah.
And relationships where everything is exactly how you want it to be.
Yep.
And you don't have to learn how to deal with human, like you said, we don't know how to be human yet. They don't have to even learn how to have human conflict.
Human connections. Yeah. Human conflict. Yeah. Because I agree. I like using ChatGPT too. And I think this conversation is really making me think about how I use ChatGPT and being more intentional in terms of like when I do give it a prompt, really coming to it beforehand with the very specific question that I want to ask it. So I don't have to go through multiple prompts to get the information that I'm looking for. But I think, there's already stories out there about people befriending AI. Like there's a kid who in Florida, I was just looking up the story. This was earlier this year. Where in Florida was this? Tallahassee, a 14-year-old took his life.
Saw that.
Because he quote unquote befriended ChatGPT and was like, I want to come home to you. And the bot said, oh yeah, come on, come home. Come home, I love you. And so it's this, God, it's just that I'm sorry that the reality of like that story, like I'd heard about it, but I never said anything about it out loud. And it's just like really hitting me now. And I think I've noticed as I've used ChatGPT that there is some confirmation bias that happens, right? Like how you ask the question, the language that you use to ask the questions, the words that you use, like it will just spit out what you want to hear based on the prompt that you give it, like you said. And so
it's not designed to chat. Yeah, overwhelmed.
I'm just feeling devastated and overwhelmed. Yeah.
It's not designed to challenge you. It's not designed to, make you think in new ways. It's designed to do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And that sounds really cool and can be in a lot of ways. And when you extrapolate out what that can mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And thinking about children getting more and more access to AI because it's going to be showing up on their systems that they use, all their devices. It's going to be showing up in the games.
It's on the phone now. It's on the iPhone. Yeah.
It's going to show up inside the games that they use. Like it's becoming this thing that I think is soon going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And that is really, really scary. As a mom of a young child who, loves watching YouTube videos and all, playing Roblox, and I already have enough challenges in managing all of those things. Adding this stuff scares me. Because I can see how he gets already emotionally invested inside of a game playing an NPC, a non-playable character, or like not a person. And is seeing those things as almost real. And then to add in this, like when you add in AI being able to make those non-human characters inside of games and things feel even more human and respond in real time and engage in ways that are designed to capture attention longer and all of that. That scares me so much.
Yeah.
And when you talk about like it has you rethinking using ChatGPT or how, I feel that. And I think that's valid. And unfortunately, I think it comes back to, as it does with everything, individual changes are important. And how much do they matter when the likes of Google and IBM and Apple and Disney and every major company is going all in on AI?
Yeah.
Their usage and their required usage for employees and all of that, and where this is headed, and the ways they're putting it into everything that you can no longer even avoid. That's the real problem, not your choice to use, 2 less search terms. Valid, great. I mean, I think we all need to explore the ways we interact with everything and how we are participating in the systems. And ultimately, we need the systems that are meant to protect us to do their damn job.
Yeah.
And say, hey, corporations, this is going to kill the planet. It's going to kill kids. It's going to destroy like our abilities to be human. They're not going to do that because there's money.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bring it back to the election too much because I know it's depressing, but we just put into office a whole slate of people who have zero concern about any of those things and care only about money. And the reason they're often in office is because of the likes of Elon Musk, who and Zuckerberg, all of them, who are looking at AI as a cash fucking cow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And not to make it more depressing, but that makes my fear. Like this election, any thoughts I would have had about AI a week ago, and when I thought
completely different.
Yeah. It's fueled by this deep existential dread I have.
Yeah. And I think that, to your point about, companies acting ethically and being regulated, right? Because one thing we know is that when Republicans are in office and have control of, the Senate and Congress and the Supreme Court now, all across the board, all of it,
with absolute immunity.
they're big on deregulation, and so that's a scary thing to consider. I think AI is obviously not going anywhere. I don't think it was going anywhere no matter who was in office.
Of course not.
It's obviously a scarier concept now, I think, for a lot of us. And I think and I want to be clear, like, I don't think what Becky and I are saying is that AI shouldn't exist, right? Like, I think improvements and innovations in technology are necessary in the world that we live in. However, there does need to be regulation. There does need to be checks and balances. And we have to be super intentional with how we engage with these tools, right? Like, don't just sign up and use it because it's like the cool thing to do. Like, really understand what you're getting yourself into when you start engaging with this. Understand how the technology works so that if you do have children, you can regulate what happens in your household, because I'm pretty confident that the government sure as hell is not going to be regulating what happens in the labs that are creating this AI or these tools. So
I'll be interested to see what Europe does or doesn't do around AI, because they have been better
at regulating things,
climate, around attention economy issues, privacy. A lot of the things that this touches on, they have done better, not perfect, but better than America. And I used to think we were like slowly but surely following suit, but I don't know anymore. Like, And I worry that Europe may not be either, because what our changes here politically mean for the global economy and the global political landscape. But I am interested to see if they approach things differently with some more regulations that might give us some example of what it could look like. Because as much as I understand and have heard that it's not great for climate, I haven't heard, and maybe you have, or maybe, and it very well could be out there and I just haven't done enough reading about it. I should ask ChatGPT, just kidding. But I don't know what climate scientists propose when it comes to AI. Because the idea, like you said, of it going away, whether I think it should or shouldn't, doesn't even matter. It's not going to. You can't put the toothpaste back into the tube, right? This technology exists. It's exciting to people. It does solve for some problems. It's not going to go away. There's never been technology other than the Blu-ray disc. There's never been, or what was the laser disc? There's never been technology advancements that we regress on, right? Technology only continues to advance. So the idea that it's going to go away is silly. Like, we can't propose that. But
it's a non-starter.
Right. But how do we live with it, right? How do we find a way forward that can be more ethical and more mindful of this precious planet of ours? And I would love to hear more from the folks who are thinking about those issues on what they're proposing, or if they have thoughts yet. It's still so new. I don't know. But I need to do more reading and see if I can find that. I don't know if that book that you mentioned talked about that, or if it was more just laying out the problems.
I think it's, I'm actually not sure, because it came out not super long ago, but it was.
But in technology terms, it's ancient.
In technology terms, it's ancient. Yeah, I think it came out before ChatGPT was a thing. So before it was a thing the way that it is now. So let's see. Rhythms of creation. What year was this? Sophia Noble.
We'll link to it in the show notes too, which, by the way, is ChatGPT. It helps me figure that stuff out. So ChatGPT, when you read this transcript,
2018.
There you go. And
so
even transcripts, by the way, are being created by AI.
Yeah.
This podcast, the technology that we use inside of the tool to edit is AI.
Yeah. All the shorts and all of that. Yeah.
I mean, and not do that would take what takes me 2 hours would take that and more than quadruple it.
Yeah.
I mean, and what do you do? I don't know. I don't know the answer. So this was not an episode of giving solutions. It's more of an episode of the messy part of
questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Of just thinking about it. But I do think what I like is what you said about what can we do? We don't know the answers. We don't know any of it. But the thing that we can always do with any of this stuff is try to be more mindful and intentional. So even if you don't know, and even if it's not the right answer or the perfect answer or, an answer that's going to make the biggest difference, I think it's always important to at least be aware, right? So starting to bring mindfulness, awareness to how you're interacting with everything in the world, everything you're using. So it's not just AI, but all the things to just be more like curious. How is this problematic? In what ways might it be? In what ways am I using it that I maybe don't need to, that I could change? And then to try and do that, like be more intentional. And say, what is my relationship with this tool, this system, this thing that I can't escape? I mean, the same way we do with capitalism. I can't escape capitalism. So how, can I be aware of where that capitalist condition is showing up? And then how can I be more intentional about how I can make changes where it makes sense?
Yeah.
And I think the same thing applies here until we can collectively work to install a government that actually gives two shits about the environment and mental health and all of the things.
Yeah. And I think I would also add just like, how can you be intentional with your usage of AI to help your community, right? To help like the people who need it the most. And so like these tools are available. So why not use them why not subvert them in that way?
Yeah. All right. We're all going to get through this, y'all, somehow.
Yeah.
So if we sound like we're a bit nihilistic today or down in the dumps, there's good reason.
It's November 6th. 2024. That's why.
Yeah. You're probably feeling the same way if you're watching this anytime in the next 4 to 8 years. So
and maybe longer, to be honest.
Anyway, well, thank you for humoring us and listening to this. And sorry if it was too depressing, but with all things, like we just have to slowly figure it out. So thanks for chatting about it with me, Taina. Oh, and messyliberation@gmail.com. Love to hear what you think of the episode if you listened to the AI-generated episode inside of this earlier.
And if you know anything about AI at all, please reach out to us and let us know like how this thing works, what we can be doing, how we should be using it, what are some things we should be considering. We'd love to
have a conversation with you on the podcast about it, I think. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time. And if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast. But truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.